My parents erased me from their lives over a dinner course, treating me like a bad investment they needed to cut loose. Standing on the porch with nothing but a deactivated phone and my grandfather's scuffed silver card, I felt powerless. Yet when the bank manager stared at the screen and stammered out $1.2 billion, the dynamic shifted instantly. My parents had not just evicted me from the family home, they had evicted the wrong person. My name is Emery Castillo, and I should have known that a dinner invitation from my parents was never just about sharing a meal. In the Caldwell household, calories were counted, words were weighed, and affection was conditional. I drove my sedan up the winding driveway of the estate in Charlotte, the gravel crunching beneath my tires sounding like bones breaking. The house loomed against the darkening sky, a sprawling neoclassical monster that my father, Sterling Caldwell, liked to call his legacy. To me, it just looked like a very expensive prison. I was 33 years old. I was a senior risk management compliance officer at Marston Ridge Solutions. I had my own apartment, my own life, and a reputation for spotting cracks in corporate foundations before they turned into sinkholes. Yet, as I parked the car and walked toward those massive oak double doors, I felt like a child again. I felt small. I checked my watch. It was exactly 7 o'clock in the evening. Punctuality was not a virtue in this house. It was a requirement for survival. The maid let me in with a sympathetic nod. Taking my coat, the air inside was chilled to a precise 68 degrees, smelling of lemon polish and old money. I walked into the dining room. There was no food on the table. The long mahogany surface, polished to a mirror shine, was bare except for a crystal pitcher of water, 3 glasses, and a thick leather-bound folder sitting directly at my father's place setting. My mother, Diane Caldwell, was standing by the window, swirling a glass of Chardonnay. She did not turn when I entered. She was wearing a silk dress that likely cost more than my car. Her posture rigid, her hair coiffed into a helmet of blonde perfection. My father was seated at the head of the table, his fingers steepled together. He looked like a statue of a Roman senator, if Roman senators wore Italian bespoke suits. "Sit down, Emery," my father said. His voice was smooth, devoid of warmth. I pulled out the heavy chair to his right. "Where is dinner?" I asked, though the sinking feeling in my gut told me the answer. "We can eat after we handle business," my mother said. Finally turning around, her eyes swept over my outfit, a simple blazer and slacks, and I saw the familiar flicker of disapproval. "We have a situation with the Meridian Group, a temporary cash flow issue." I looked at my father. "You called me here for work, Dad. I work in compliance for FinTech. I do not handle real estate development. We need a signature," Sterling said, sliding the leather folder across the mahogany. It made a dry hissing sound. "We are closing a bridge loan tomorrow morning with a private equity firm. The bank requires an independent risk assessment verification from a certified officer. Since you hold the certification and you are family, it makes the most sense." I hesitated. My internal alarm bells were already ringing deafeningly loud. Conflict of interest was the first phrase that popped into my head, but my father's gaze was heavy, pressing down on me. I opened the folder. It was a standard risk disclosure packet for a loan of $45 million. I began to read. My eyes scanned the lines, trained by years of looking for discrepancies. At first, it looked standard, but then I turned to page 12, the collateral valuation for the new waterfront project. I stopped. I reread the line. "Dad, this valuation," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It lists the Meridian Harbor property at $80 million based on projected occupancy of 90%. Sterling took a sip of water. "That is correct. But the foundation hasn't even been poured yet," I said, "and the anchor tenant pulled out 3 months ago. I read about it in the business journal. Without the anchor tenant, the pre-lease occupancy is barely 20%. This valuation is based on a fantasy. It is based on potential." My mother interjected, walking over to stand behind my father's chair. Her hand rested on his shoulder. "A united front. Don't be pedantic, Emery." I flipped to the cash flow statements. "Here, you have listed rental income from the Parkside units as active revenue. Dad, Parkside is being renovated. It is empty. You cannot list projected future income as current liquid assets. That is falsifying collateral. I looked up at him. The silence in the room was thick enough to choke on. My father did not blink. The lenders understand the nuance. Emery, he said, his voice dropping an octave, this loan is just to bridge us for 6 months until the new investors come in. It is a formality. We just need a certified risk officer to sign off on the methodology. You want me to sign a document stating that I have reviewed these numbers and found them accurate? I said, my voice rising slightly. If I sign this, and the loan defaults, I am liable. This isn't just a formatting error. This is fraud. You are inflating assets by at least 200% to secure a loan you cannot service. Sterling's face hardened. He leaned forward. We are not asking for a lecture. We are asking for loyalty. The company is facing a liquidity crunch. If we do not get this $45 million by Friday, the ripple effect will trigger clauses in our other debts. We could lose the estate. We could lose everything. So you want me to commit a felony to save the house? I asked, incredulous. My mother slammed her wineglass down on the sideboard. The sound cracked through the room like a gunshot. Stop being so dramatic, she shouted, her composure cracking. You always do this. You always have to be the righteous one. Do you have any idea how much we have sacrificed to build this name, to give you the education that got you that little job of yours? You are ungrateful. I closed the folder and pushed it back toward my father. I am not signing it. Sterling looked at the folder, then at me. His eyes were cold. Dead things. Emery, I'm going to ask you one more time. Pick up the pen. I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but I locked my knees. No, I will not shield you on this. I worked too hard for my license. I am not going to jail so you can pretend to be solvent for another 6 months. My father stood up too. He was a tall man, imposing, used to terrified subordinates scrambling to obey him. But I wasn't a subordinate. I was his daughter, or I thought I was. If you walk out that door without signing, Sterling said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, do not bother coming back. You are part of this family, or you are nothing. I looked at my mother. She was glaring at me with pure venom. Think about your reputation. Emery, she hissed, who do you think you are? You are a Castillo because we allow you to be. Without us, you are just a mid-level clerk in a cheap suit. The insult stung. But the clarity hurt more. They did not see me. They never had. I was just an insurance policy they had raised from birth. A rubber stamp they had been waiting 33 years to use. Then I am nothing. I said. I turned and walked toward the archway. I expected them to yell, to scream, to chase after me. Instead, I heard my father speak one word. Now, I didn't understand what he meant until I reached the front door. It was locked. I fumbled with the latch, opening it, and stepped onto the porch. There was a suitcase sitting on the top step. I froze. It was my old travel suitcase, the one I had left in the guest room closet during my last visit. It was packed, bulging slightly. They knew, I whispered to myself. They knew I might say no. I turned back to the door, but it slammed shut in my face. The heavy thud vibrated through the wood. I heard the distinct click of the deadbolt sliding home. Mom, Dad. I pounded on the wood. This is ridiculous. Open the door. Silence answered me. I reached into my pocket for my phone. I needed to call Mara. I needed to get out of here. I pulled out my mobile and tapped the screen. No service. I frowned. I had full bars 5 minutes ago. I tried to make a call anyway. A robotic voice answered immediately. This device has been deactivated by the primary account holder. My stomach dropped. I was still on the family plan. It was something we had never changed. A vestige of control they had kept over me. They had cut it. In the 3 minutes it took me to walk from the dining room to the porch, they had cut my phone. I grabbed the handle of the suitcase. It was heavy. I dragged it down the steps to my car. I reached for my keys. Panic starting to rise in my throat like bile. I needed to get to an ATM. I needed cash. I got into my car and sped down the driveway, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I drove 2 miles to the nearest gas station. A bright, fluorescent oasis in the dark North Carolina night. I ran to the ATM in the corner. I pulled out my debit card. It was a joint account I had opened in college, linked to the family trust for emergency transfers. I inserted it and typed my PIN. Access denied. Card retained. The machine whirred and swallowed my plastic. I stared at the screen. No, 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 no. I pulled out my credit card, my platinum card. I tried to buy a bottle of water at the counter just to test it. The clerk, a teenager with headphones around his neck, ran the card. He frowned. It says declined. Miss, pick up card. I felt the blood drain from my face. They hadn't just kicked me out. They were erasing me. Every financial tether I had was somehow linked to their influence, their co-signatures, or their banking connections. Sterling Caldwell sat on the board of the bank I used. He had made a call, one call. I walked back out to my car. I had a quarter tank of gas. I had a suitcase full of clothes I hadn't packed. I had a dead phone. And I had the clothes on my back. I drove back to the main road, pulling over onto the shoulder because I couldn't see through the tears blurring my vision. I felt hollowed out. It wasn't just the money. It was the efficiency of it, the cruelty. They had a plan B for their own daughter. They had a contingency plan for disowning me. My phone, the useless brick, suddenly lit up. It wasn't a call. It was a local notification from the calendar app, synced via the car's Bluetooth, which was still grabbing a faint Wi-Fi signal from a nearby coffee shop. A voicemail had come through on my Workline app, which bypassed the carrier service. I pressed the button on my dashboard. My mother's voice filled the car. It must have been recorded seconds after I walked out the door. Emery, you have made a grave mistake. You think you can walk away. You think you have a career. No one hires a daughter who betrays her parents. No one hires a liability. By tomorrow morning, everyone in Charlotte will know exactly how unstable you are. The message ended. I sat there in the silence of the roadside. The darkness felt absolute. I was 33, and I had been deleted. Then, a second notification chimed. A priority alert from my work email. I leaned forward, squinting at the dashboard screen. Sender HR Director, Marston Ridge Solutions. Subject urgent. Mandatory meeting. Time: 8 o'clock in the morning. Body: Ms. Castillo. Your presence is required for an emergency disciplinary hearing regarding a conflict of interest complaint filed this evening. Please bring your company identification and laptop. I stared at the glowing letters. They moved fast. My father hadn't just kicked me out. He had launched a preemptive strike to discredit me before I could report the fraudulent loan. If I was fired for an ethics violation, no one would believe my testimony about the falsified valuations. I would be the disgruntled, fired daughter, and he would be the victim. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The sadness was evaporating, replaced by a cold, hard knot of realization. I looked at the passenger seat where my purse lay open. Inside, tucked in a hidden zipper pocket of my wallet, was a thin, tarnished piece of silver. It wasn't a credit card. It wasn't a debit card. It was a piece of metal my grandfather, Walter, had given me 3 days before he died. He had pressed it into my hand when my parents were out of the room, his grip surprisingly strong for a dying man. For when the wolves come, he had rasped, and they will come, Emery. I had kept it as a sentimental trinket. I had never tried to use it. I didn't even know if it was active. But right now, with my life dismantling around me like a house of cards in a hurricane, it was the only thing I had left that didn't belong to Sterling and Diane Caldwell. I put the car in drive. I had nowhere to go but forward. I had to survive the night, and then I had to face the wolves. The morning sun hitting the glass facade of Marston Ridge Solutions usually made me feel accomplished, a tangible reminder that I had built something of my own in the skyline of Charlotte. Today, however, the light felt like an interrogation lamp. I walked into the lobby at 7:45 in the morning, 15 minutes before the mandatory meeting my email had warned me about. My stomach was a knot of cold acid. I approached the security turnstiles, the same ones I had breezed through for 5 years, and tapped my ID badge against the sensor. It did not beep. It did not flash green. It emitted a low, dissonant buzz that echoed in the quiet lobby. The red light blinked rapidly. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. Excuse me. Ms. Castillo. I turned to see Ralph, the head of lobby security. He looked pained. He was a man I exchanged pleasantries with every single day, a man whose granddaughter's Girl Scout cookies I bought by the crate. Now, he would not meet my eyes. I am sorry, Ralph said, his voice dropping to a whisper. I have been instructed to escort you directly to human resources. You are not allowed on the operational floors. It was humiliating, but I kept my chin up. This was the first move. My father had not just cut my phone line, he had severed my professional lifeline. I followed Ralph into the freight elevator, the one used for deliveries and trash. The ride up to the 20th floor was silent, but the noise in my head was deafening. When the doors opened, the director of human resources, a woman named Karen Vance, who wore her authority like a suit of armor, was waiting. She was flanked by a man I recognized as the company's external legal counsel. That was when I knew this was not a conversation. It was an execution. Come in, Emery, Karen said. She did not offer me coffee. She did not offer me a seat. I took one anyway. We have received a formal complaint regarding a significant conflict of interest. Karen began, sliding a single sheet of paper across the table. It alleges that you have been using your position as a senior risk compliance officer to improperly influence the credit rating and risk modeling of a private entity, specifically the Caldwell Meridian Group, for personal familial gain. I stared at her, feeling the blood drain from my face. It was a lie so bold, so inverted from the truth, that it was brilliant. I had refused to sign their fraudulent loan, so they had accused me of trying to rig the system for them. By filing the complaint first, they had painted me as the unethical party. If I tried to blow the whistle now, it would look like a vindictive counter-accusation from a disgraced employee. My parents filed this, didn't they? I asked, my voice steady despite the shaking in my hands. We cannot disclose the source of the inquiry at this stage. The lawyer cut in, his voice dry and flat. However, given the nature of the allegations and the sensitive financial data you have access to, Marston Ridge has zero tolerance for nepotism or data manipulation. I have not manipulated anything, I said, leaning forward. In fact, the opposite is true. I refused to validate a fraudulent valuation for them last night. This is retaliation. You have to let me show you the— Karen held up a hand. The investigation is already underway. Emery, but until it is concluded, we must follow protocol. You are placed on immediate administrative leave without pay. We have already secured your laptop and your company phone. Your access to the servers has been revoked. She paused, then delivered the final blow. Given the severity of the breach, we also have to notify the Regional Ethics Board. Your compliance certification is suspended pending the audit. I sat back, the air leaving my lungs. They had not just fired me, they had nuked my career. Without that certification, I could not work in fintech, banking, or risk management anywhere in the country. My father knew exactly where to hit. He knew that without my job, I was defenseless. I stood up. I did not want them to see me cry. I will clear my name, I said, and when I do, I expect an apology. Karen did not look up from her file. Please leave your badge on the table. Ralph will escort you out. 10 minutes later, I was standing on the sidewalk. I had no box of personal belongings. They had not let me back to my desk to get my photos or my plants. I had my purse, my coat, and a crushing sense of vertigo. The city moved around me, busy and indifferent. While I stood frozen, I walked 3 miles to Mara Benton's apartment. Mara was my best friend from law school, a public defender who fought tooth and nail for people who had nothing. She was the only person in my life who knew the Caldwells were vultures, not saints. When she opened the door, she took one look at my face and pulled me into a hug that threatened to crack my ribs. She didn't ask questions. She just pulled me inside, sat me on her thrift store velvet sofa, and handed me a mug of black coffee. I told her everything: the dinner, the loan, the lockout, the HR ambush. They are thorough, Mara said, pacing her small living room. Her floorboards creaked under her boots. Sterling and Diane do not leave loose ends. They are trying to starve you out. If you have no income and no credibility, you can't hire a lawyer to fight them, and you certainly can't stop the loan. I checked my banking app on Mara's Wi-Fi. My personal savings account, the one I had built slowly over 5 years, had $6,000 in it. My checking account was overdrawn because of an auto pay for my rent that had hit this morning. $6,000. In a city like Charlotte, with no job prospects. That was maybe 2 months of survival if I ate ramen. But with legal fees, it was nothing. It was less than nothing. I have enough cash for a week. Maybe 2, I said, staring at the floor. You are staying here, Mara said firmly. The couch is lumpy, but the rent is free. We will figure this out. A sharp knock on the door interrupted us. Mara frowned and looked through the peephole. It's a courier. She opened the door, and a young man in a bike helmet shoved a thick envelope into her hands. Sign here. He grunted. Mara signed and ripped the envelope open. She scanned the document, her eyebrows knitting together. What is it? I asked. A cease and desist, Mara said, tossing the papers onto the coffee table. From your father's legal team. They are formally warning you that any disclosure of privileged family discussions or proprietary business information regarding Caldwell Meridian will result in a defamation lawsuit seeking damages in the millions. I picked up the paper. The language was aggressive. It was designed to terrify. Any attempt to interfere with ongoing commercial transactions will be met with immediate litigation. They are scared, I whispered. Mara looked at me. What? They are terrified, I said, looking up. If they were secure, they would just ignore me. They wouldn't send a legal threat to a friend's house less than 24 hours after kicking me out. They are desperate for this loan. Mara. More desperate than I thought. My phone buzzed. It was a text message on Signal. I had managed to log in on my personal device using Mara's internet. The message was from a contact I had cultivated years ago, a junior underwriter named Trent, who worked at a rival firm. I had messaged him from the bathroom at Marston Ridge before they took my badge, asking if he heard anything about my family's firm. Read this carefully. The text said, then delete it. The word on the street is that Caldwell Meridian is underwater. They have a shadow debt with a private lender in Chicago that is coming due next week. If they don't pay, they lose the controlling stake in the company. That is why they need the bridge loan. They are robbing Peter to pay Paul. But Paul is holding a gun. I let the phone drop to my lap. It made sense now. The inflated valuation, the rush, the sheer panic in my mother's eyes. They were not just protecting their reputation. They were fighting for their lives, and they were willing to sacrifice me to stay afloat. I felt a sudden wave of exhaustion. It was only 2 p.m, but I felt like I had lived a decade since sunrise. I curled up on Mara's sofa, pulling my coat over me like a blanket. Rest, Mara said softly, grabbing her briefcase. I have court in an hour. We will strategize tonight. Don't answer the door for anyone. I drifted into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of my grandfather, Walter. I dreamed of the day he taught me how to play chess. Look at the board. Emery, he had said. When you think you have lost, that is when you are most dangerous. Because you have nothing left to lose. I woke up with a start. The apartment was dark. Mara wasn't back yet. The streetlights outside cast long, jagged shadows across the room. I sat up, my heart pounding. The feeling of helplessness was suffocating. I needed to do something. I couldn't just wait for them to sue me or starve me. I looked at the suitcase sitting in the corner, the one my father had thrown out the door. I hadn't even opened it yet. I dragged it over to the sofa and unzipped it. Inside, it was a chaotic mess of clothes I had left at their house over the years. An old sweater, a pair of running shoes, and at the bottom, tucked into the side pocket, was a leather-bound notebook. I pulled it out. It was Grandpa Walter's old journal. He had left it to me along with the trinket before he passed. I had never really read it, too painful to see his handwriting. I opened it now. The pages were filled with numbers. sketches of buildings, and philosophical musings. But on the very last page, written in shaky ink, was a single line. When you are cornered, do not beg. Check the truth. Check the truth. I reached into the pocket of my blazer, the one I was still wearing from the morning. My fingers brushed against the cold metal of the silver card. I pulled it out and held it under the lamp. It was heavy, heavier than any credit card I had ever held. It was sterling silver, tarnished with age. On the front, there were no numbers, no expiration date, no Visa or MasterCard logo, just a simple engraving of a mountain peak and the name Summit Heritage Trust. Below that, a name Walter H. Caldwell, and below that, a series of 10 digits embossed into the metal. I had always assumed it was a commemorative piece, a paperweight, a vanity item rich men get to stroke their egos. But my grandfather was not a vain man. He was a practical man. He did not leave useless things behind. I turned the card over. On the back, there was a magnetic strip, thicker than usual, and a signature panel that was blank. I thought about the shadow debt. I thought about the fraud. I thought about my parents' desperate need to silence me. They were playing a game of smoke and mirrors. Grandpa Walter had seen this coming. He had told me the wolves would come. I grabbed my phone and searched for Summit Heritage Trust. It was not a commercial bank. There were no branches on street corners. The search result yielded a single, static landing page. Private Wealth Management. By invitation only. Established 1920, there was an address listed. It was a nondescript building in the financial district, tucked away between two skyscrapers. I looked at the card again. The tarnish seemed to glow in the dim light. This was not a keepsake. This was a key. My parents had stripped me of my job, my money, and my name. They thought they had broken my standing in the world. But they had forgotten who built the foundation they were standing on. I stood up, clutching the silver card so tightly it dug into my palm. I was done crying. I was done reacting. Tomorrow morning, I would walk into Summit Heritage Trust. I did not know what was in the account. Maybe it was empty. Maybe it was just a safety deposit box with his old watch. But I was going to find out. I was going to check the truth. The silver card sat on the chipped laminate of Mara's kitchen counter, looking completely out of place next to a half-empty box of cereal and a stack of legal briefs. I stared at it while the coffee machine hissed and sputtered, trying to summon a memory that had been buried under years of corporate climbing and family trauma. For the last decade, I had treated this object like a trinket, a sentimental paperweight. I had kept it in the bottom of a jewelry box I rarely opened, assuming it was just a piece of nostalgia, a dead account, a club membership that had expired, or perhaps just a physical token of affection from the only man in the Caldwell line who hadn't looked at me and seen an asset to be leveraged. Walter Caldwell, my grandfather, while my father, Sterling, saw the world as a chessboard where every move had to yield a return on investment. Walter saw the world as a series of stories. He was a man who wore cardigans with frayed cuffs, despite owning half the commercial real estate in 3 counties. He smelled of peppermint and old library books, a scent that used to be my only refuge when the air in my parents' house became too thin to breathe. I closed my eyes, leaning against the counter, and let the memory wash over me. It was 16 years ago. I was 17, sitting in his study, crying because my mother had just canceled my summer art program to force me into a preparatory internship for finance. Walter had walked in, not with platitudes, but with a ledger. He sat down across from me and opened the heavy book. "Stop crying, Emery," he had said, his voice gravelly but kind. "Tears rust the machinery. Look here." He pointed to a column of figures. "Do you know what this is?" "Numbers?" I had sniffled. "No," he corrected. "These are lies. This is a company pretending to be strong when it is weak. And this," he pointed to another column, "is the truth. It is ugly, it is small, but it is real." He looked me in the eye, his blue gaze piercing through my teenage self-pity. "Your father fears numbers because he thinks they control him. Your mother worships them because she thinks they define her. But you, Emery, you need to understand them. Do not fear the numbers. Fear the lies people wrap around them. That was the day he gave me the card. He had pulled it from a hidden compartment in his desk, a false bottom in the drawer that I hadn't even known existed. He slid it across the oak surface, face down. "Memorize this code," he had whispered, leaning in as if the walls had ears. 7, 2, 8, 4, 1, 9. I repeated it. 7, 2, 8, 4, 1, 9. Again, he commanded. We did it until the sequence was burned into my hippocampus, deeper than my own social security number. "What is it for?" I had asked, turning the heavy silver rectangle over in my hands. It felt cold, dense, substantial. "It is an escape hatch," Walter had said, his face suddenly serious, almost grim. "Families like ours, we eat our young. Emery, we do it politely, with silver forks and linen napkins, but we consume them nonetheless. If the day ever comes when you are on the menu, if you are betrayed, if you are cornered, if they try to erase you, you take this to Summit Heritage Trust." I had laughed then, a nervous, teenage laugh. "You sound like a spy movie, Grandpa." "I sound like a man who knows his son," he had replied sadly. 2 months later, he died of a sudden stroke. My parents mourned him with a lavish funeral that was more of a networking event than a farewell. They cried on cue for the cameras, and in the chaos of grief and college applications, I put the card away. I told myself Walter was just being dramatic in his old age. I told myself my parents were strict. Yes, but they weren't monsters. I opened my eyes in Mara's kitchen. I was 33 now, and I finally understood. He wasn't dramatic. He was prophetic. Mara walked into the kitchen, dressed in her court suit, her hair pulled back in a severe bun. She saw me staring at the card. "You are actually going to go, aren't you?" she asked, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "I have to," I said, my voice raspy. "I have $6,000 to my name. Mara, my career is torpedoed. My reputation is being shredded. This is the only thread I have left to pull." Mara picked up the card, weighing it in her hand. She frowned. "Emery, listen to me as your lawyer, not just your friend. If this connects to an undisclosed inheritance, and you access it, Sterling and Diane will go nuclear. They will argue that Walter was senile when he gave it to you. They will argue undue influence. They will tie you up in probate court until you are 80 years old. They are already going nuclear," I countered, taking the card back and slipping it into my pocket. It felt warm now, absorbing my body heat. "They accused me of fraud yesterday. They kicked me out. They don't need a reason to destroy me anymore. They are doing it for sport. If there is $500 in this account, I will take it. If there is nothing but a letter telling me he loved me, I will take that too. I just need to know I am not crazy." Mara sighed, grabbing her briefcase. "Just promise me you won't sign anything without showing it to me first. Banks like this, they play by different rules. I promise." I dropped Mara at the courthouse and drove my car toward the financial district. The gaslight flickered on the dashboard, a glowing orange reminder of my precarious reality. I ignored it. Summit Heritage Trust was not located in one of the gleaming glass towers that dominated the Charlotte skyline. It was situated in a narrow, 4-story building wedged between 2 skyscrapers, looking like a stubborn relic of a bygone era. The facade was gray stone, heavy and imposing, with iron bars over the ground-floor windows that looked more like decorative art than security measures. There was no ATM outside, no hours of operation posted on the door, just a brass plaque, polished to a mirror shine, reading Summit Heritage Trust, Est. 1920. I parked 3 blocks away in a metered spot, using the loose change I found in my cup holder. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. My blazer was wrinkled from being slept in on the sofa. My eyes were rimmed with red. I didn't look like a Caldwell. I looked like a woman who had just lost a fistfight with life. I walked the 3 blocks, the wind whipping through the concrete canyons of the city. As I approached the heavy double doors of the bank, a security guard in a dark suit stepped forward. He didn't have a weapon visible, but he moved with the precise, coiled energy of ex-military. "Do you have an appointment?" "Ma'am," he asked. his eyes scanning me from my scuffed heels to my messy hair. "No," I said, keeping my chin high. "I am a client." He hesitated. My appearance screamed vagrant, but my voice screamed entitled. The contradiction seemed to confuse him enough to step aside. He pulled the door open. The silence hit me first. The interior of the bank was hushed, like a cathedral or a mausoleum. The floors were marble, black and white checkered, echoing the click of my heels. The walls were paneled in dark walnut that absorbed the light. There were no teller lines, no ropes, no digital screens flashing interest rates. Just a vast open lobby with a few leather armchairs and a single, long mahogany counter at the far end. The air smelled of beeswax and money, not the dirty smell of dollar bills, but the conceptual scent of wealth quiet, assured, and ancient. I walked toward the counter. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt like an intruder. I felt like a fraud. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around and run back to the safety of Mara's lumpy couch. Behind the counter stood a young man, probably in his late 20s. He was wearing a suit that cost more than my car. His hair was gelled back, and he was typing something on a sleek, flat keyboard. He looked up as I approached. His expression was polite, professional, and completely devoid of warmth. It was the customer service face reserved for people who clearly had wandered into the wrong building. "Can I help you?" "Miss?" he asked. His tone suggested he was about to give me directions to the nearest public restroom or the subway station. I didn't trust my voice. I was afraid it would crack. I was afraid I would start crying again. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver card. I placed it on the mahogany counter. It made a distinct, heavy sound. Clack. "I am here to access my account," I said. The young man looked at the card. He blinked. Then he looked closer. His polite indifference evaporated instantly. He went very still. His hands froze over the keyboard. He looked up at me, and this time, he really looked at me. His eyes widened slightly, shifting from the tarnished silver on the counter to my face, searching for a resemblance, searching for a reason why a woman in a wrinkled blazer was carrying a piece of metal that clearly terrified him. "Please wait one moment," he said. His voice was breathless. He didn't touch the card. It was as if he was afraid it would burn him. He picked up a phone beneath the counter, an old-fashioned handset with a cord. He dialed a single digit and whispered something I couldn't hear. I stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the counter to stop them from shaking. I expected security to come. I expected him to say the card was stolen, invalid, a fake. Instead, a heavy door to the left of the counter opened. A man walked out. He was older, perhaps 60, with silver hair and a tailored charcoal suit. He walked with a sense of urgency that seemed out of place in this tomb of calm. He looked at the teller, then at the card, and finally at me. "Ms. Castillo?" the older man asked. "Yes," I whispered. "I am Elliot Vaughn, the branch manager," he said. He didn't ask for ID. He didn't ask for verification. He just gestured toward the open door. "If you would please come with me, we should discuss this in private." The teller was staring at me with open-mouthed shock now. I picked up the silver card. It felt heavier than before. I walked around the counter, following Elliot Vaughn. As I stepped across the threshold into the hallway leading to the private offices, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air pressure seemed to drop. Elliot ushered me into a room at the end of the hall. It wasn't an office. It was a viewing room. There was a large mahogany table, 2 leather chairs, and a wall of secure deposit boxes behind a steel grate. "Please, sit," he said. I sat. Elliot remained standing. He walked to the door and closed it. Click. The sound of the lock engaging was loud and final. It echoed in the small room. I looked at the heavy door, then back at the manager. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head, an escape hatch. This wasn't just a bank account, I realized, with a jolt of adrenaline that made my vision sharpen, that I had just walked into the center of a secret my family had been hiding for a very long time, and now that the door was locked, there was no turning back. The heavy door clicked shut, sealing out the hum of the lobby and the curious gaze of the young teller. The room was soundproof. The sudden silence pressed against my ears like water. Elliot Vaughn did not sit down immediately. He walked to the far wall, adjusted a thermostat that was already set to a perfect temperature, and then moved to the head of the mahogany table. He treated the silver card I had placed on the surface not like a piece of plastic, but like an unexploded ordnance. "Please, Ms. Castillo," he said, gesturing to the leather chair opposite him. His politeness was excessive, bordering on nervous deference. It was the kind of behavior one usually reserved for royalty or federal agents. I sat down. My hands were in my lap, gripping each other so tightly my knuckles were white. I was trying to stop them from trembling. I kept thinking about the overdraft notification on my phone, the $6,000 that had to last me the rest of my life, the threat of the lawsuit hanging over my head. Elliot put on a pair of thin cotton gloves before he picked up the silver card. He examined the back, then the front. "This account," he began, his voice measured, "has been dormant for a very long time. In my 20 years at Summit Heritage Trust, I have never seen a Tier 1 legacy card presented in person." "Tier 1?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Elliot did not answer directly. He moved to a secure terminal built into the table. It wasn't a standard computer. It looked like a dedicated terminal, air-gapped from the internet. "I need to perform a multi-factor identity verification," he said, his eyes fixed on the screen. "It is a protocol established by the grantor. Strict adherence is required. Do you have a government-issued identification?" I nodded and pulled my driver's license from my purse. It felt flimsy and cheap in this room of wood and leather. I slid it across the table. Elliot took it, scanned it under a blue light, and typed in my information. "Verification 1 complete," he murmured. "Next, biometric confirmation." He opened a small, brushed steel panel on the table surface to reveal a fingerprint scanner. It looked older, the glass slightly worn, but clearly well-maintained. "Please place your right index finger on the sensor." I hesitated. I was 17 when my grandfather died. Had he really set this up back then? I extended my hand. My fingertip touched the cold glass. A red light swept across my skin, followed by a green beep. "Match confirmed," Elliot said. He seemed to relax slightly, but the tension in his shoulders remained. Finally, the access code. He turned a small keypad toward me. It was shielded, so he couldn't see what I typed. "This is a 10-digit alphanumeric code, or a 6-digit numeric PIN, depending on the tier," he said. I didn't need him to explain. The numbers were screaming in my head. 7, 2, 8, 4, 1, 9. I typed them in. My fingers moved automatically. A muscle memory dormant for 16 years. I pressed the green Enter key. For a long moment, nothing happened. The terminal whirred. A low fan spinning up as if the machine itself was waking from a deep hibernation. Elliot watched the screen. I watched Elliot. I saw the moment the data loaded. It started in his eyes. They widened, just a fraction. Then, his jaw tightened. His hand, which had been hovering over the mouse, stopped in midair. He went completely still. It wasn't the freeze of a computer glitch. It was the freeze of a human brain trying to comprehend a reality that defied expectation. He sat there for 10 seconds, 20 seconds. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I thought there was a mistake. I thought he was about to tell me the account was closed, that my parents had drained it years ago, that I was truly and utterly alone. "Mr. Vaughn," I asked, my voice cracking, "is there a problem?" He blinked, slowly, as if coming out of a trance. He looked up at me. The color had drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and waxy under the recessed lighting. "No, Ms. Castillo," he said. His voice was faint. "There is no problem." He turned the monitor around. The screen was black with green text, like an old DOS prompt. There were lines of code, lists of assets, and at the bottom, a total value summary. I leaned forward. I squinted. I saw the number, but my brain refused to translate it into money. It just looked like a string of digits. 1, 2, 0, 0, 0. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. I blinked. I counted the zeros. That I started. But the words died in my throat. Elliot cleared his throat. He sounded dry, parched. Ms. Castillo, he said, regaining his professional composure with visible effort. The total value of the Walter H. Caldwell Legacy Trust, as of this morning's market opening, is approximately $1.2 billion. I stared at him. I heard the words. I understood the English language. But the sentence made no sense. 1.2 million, I asked. I was bargaining. Million was a lot. Million was life-changing. Million was freedom. Billion. Elliot corrected softly. With a B. The room spun. I actually gripped the edge of the table to keep from sliding off the chair. $1.2 billion. That wasn't just money. That was sovereignty. That was the GDP of a small island nation. That was enough to buy Marston Ridge Solutions, fire the HR director, and burn the building down, and still have enough left over to buy a fleet of yachts, if it can't be. I stammered. My grandfather. He was wealthy. Yes, but he wasn't. This isn't Walter Caldwell was a very prudent man. Elliot said. He began to scroll through the asset list on the screen. This trust was established 40 years ago. It holds majority equity in several quiet but highly profitable logistics firms, significant municipal bond holdings, and most notably, a vast portfolio of commercial real estate in emerging markets that boomed in the early 2000s. All dividends were reinvested automatically. It has been compounding, untouched, for decades. He looked at me with a new expression. It wasn't just respect anymore, it was fear. You are the sole beneficiary. Ms. Castillo, the trust is irrevocable. It is blind, meaning no one else in your family knows it exists. Or rather, they know a trust exists, but they have no access rights, no visibility, and likely no idea of the scale. I felt a wave of nausea. My parents, Sterling and Diane, they were fighting for a $45 million loan. They were lying, cheating, and destroying their own daughter for $45 million. And all this time, I had $1.2 billion in my pocket. Why, I whispered. Why did he hide it? Why give it to me? Elliot tapped a key on the terminal. A drawer in the table popped open with a hydraulic hiss. Inside sat 2 items, a heavy set of iron keys, and a thick, red envelope sealed with wax. Your grandfather left specific instructions, Elliot said. He reached into the drawer and took out the envelope. He held it with both hands. This is the crowning mechanism of the trust, he explained. This envelope is subject to a trigger condition. It could only be retrieved if the beneficiary you presented the silver card in person and passed the distress verification. Distress verification, I asked. The PIN you used, Elliot said quietly. 728419. That is the distress code. If you had used the standard access PIN, the system would have just granted you a monthly allowance. But you used the distress code. That tells the system that you are in danger or under duress. I felt a chill run down my spine. Walter knew. 16 years ago. He knew I would only use this card if I had nowhere else to turn. Elliot placed the red envelope in front of me. The instructions state that you are to open this immediately upon retrieval, he said. I reached out. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely grasp the paper. The wax seal was stamped with my grandfather's initials, WHC. I broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten, and a small digital flash drive. I unfolded the paper. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was spiky, forceful, and unapologetic. Emery, if you are reading this, they have done it. They have pushed you out. I hoped I was wrong. I hoped Sterling would grow a spine and Diane would grow a heart. But I am a man who bets on data, and the data always pointed to this day. Do not feel guilty for the wealth you now hold. It was never theirs. I built it. I protected it. And I saved it for the one person in this family who understands that integrity is more valuable than a balance sheet. But money is not just a shield. Emery, it is a sword. And if you are here, it means you need a weapon. The flash drive contains the records of the gray transactions your father thinks he buried. Use them if you must. But remember, once you start this war, there is no going back. Love, Grandpa. I lowered the letter. The silence in the room was absolute. Ms. Castillo, Elliot asked gently. I looked at the flash drive in the envelope. My parents hadn't just kicked me out because of a loan. They had kicked me out because I was the only person who could spot their crimes. And Walter had given me the evidence from the grave. I looked up at Elliot Vaughn. The shock had faded, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. I need access to the liquid funds. I said. My voice was different now. It was steady. It was the voice of a woman who owned the bank, not a woman begging for a loan. Of course, Elliot said, straightening up. We can issue you a black limitless card immediately. We can also arrange for a wire transfer to any external account, though I would advise keeping the bulk of the assets here for security. Transfer $100,000 to my checking account for immediate expenses. I said, and I need the contact information for the best forensic accounting firm and the most aggressive trust attorney in the state, not someone from my father's club. Someone who hates my father's club. Elliot allowed a small, grim smile to touch his lips. I believe I know exactly who to call. Ms. Castillo, Gideon Pike. He is difficult, but he is the best, and he had a great respect for your grandfather. Good, I said. I stood up. I took the red envelope and the iron keys. Elliot walked me to the door. As he reached for the handle, he paused. Ms. Castillo, he said, for what it is worth, if the rumors about the Caldwell Meridian Group are true, this capital puts you in a unique position. You could save them. I looked at the polished brass handle. I thought about the suitcase on the porch. I thought about the deactivated phone. I thought about my mother's voice calling me a liability. I'm not here to save them. Mr. Vaughn, I said. Elliot nodded, understanding. He opened the door. I walked out into the main lobby. The air felt different. The marble floor felt solid beneath my feet. I walked past the young teller, who was now staring at me with wide, terrified eyes. He had clearly seen the account balance on his own screen before Elliot locked it. I pushed open the heavy front doors and stepped out into the biting wind of the financial district. The city looked the same, but I was different. I touched the red envelope in my pocket. My parents had evicted me because they thought I was weak. They thought I was poor. They thought I was alone. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold air. They were wrong on all counts. I walked toward my car. I had a phone call to make to a man named Gideon Pike. And then, I was going to rewrite the definition of family business. The air in Mara's apartment felt stagnant, a stark contrast to the sterile, chilled atmosphere of the bank vault I had just left. It was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. The sunlight was slanting through the blinds, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I sat at Mara's small dining table, the heavy iron keys and the flash drive sitting in front of me like artifacts from an alien civilization. Mara was pacing behind me, still wearing her court heels, the clicking sound a rhythmic metronome to my racing heart. She had canceled her afternoon consultations the moment I called her from the car. Put it in, Mara said, stopping behind my chair. Her hand rested on my shoulder, heavy and grounding. We need to know what we are dealing with. I opened Mara's laptop. It was an old machine, the fan whirring loudly as it woke up. It seemed almost disrespectful to plug a drive worth over $1 billion into a computer that struggled to run a web browser. But it was what we had. I inserted the USB drive. A window popped up immediately. No password required. Just a single folder named For Emery. I clicked it. Inside, there were 3 subfolders and 1 video file labeled Watch Me First, MP4. I took a deep breath. My grandfather had been dead for 16 years. The thought of seeing him moving, speaking, living again was terrifying. I hovered the cursor over the file. Do you want me to leave? Mara asked softly. No, I said. I need a witness. I double-clicked the file. The media player opened. The screen went black for a second. And then, suddenly, there he was. Walter Caldwell was sitting in his leather armchair in the library of the estate, the same room where I had been forbidden to play as a child because my mother thought I would scratch the floors. He was wearing his favorite beige cardigan, the one with the suede patches on the elbows. He looked frail, his skin papery, but his eyes were sharp, burning with a blue intensity that the low-resolution camera couldn't dull. He leaned forward toward the camera lens, adjusting it with a shaking hand. "Is this thing on?" he muttered. "Right. Okay." He sat back and looked directly into the lens. It felt like he was looking right through the screen, across time, straight into my soul. "Hello, Emery," he began. His voice was raspy, the sound of it hitting me like a physical blow. Tears pricked my eyes instantly. "If you are watching this, it means I'm gone," Walter continued. "And more importantly, it means you have found yourself in a position where you had to use the silver card. I prayed you never would. I prayed that Sterling and Diane would prove me wrong. But I am a man who deals in probabilities, not hopes. And the probability is that if you are watching this, they have cut you off." He paused, taking a sip of water from a glass on his side table. "I want you to listen to me very carefully. Sweetheart, the money in the trust, it is a lot. It is enough to buy countries. It is enough to ruin you if you let it. But I did not leave it to you for revenge. I did not leave it to you so you could buy diamonds or fancy cars to flaunt in their faces." He leaned in closer, his expression hardening. "I left it to you so you would never, ever have to beg them for love." I let out a sob, covering my mouth with my hand. Mara squeezed my shoulder tighter. "Your parents," Walter said, his voice dripping with a mixture of sadness and disdain, "are people who mistake net worth for self-worth. They are hollow. Emery, they have filled themselves with reputation and prestige because they have nothing else inside. And people like that, they view children not as human beings, but as extensions of their own brand. As long as you reflect well on them, they will keep you. The moment you threaten that image, they will discard you." He sighed, a long, rattling sound. "I knew you were different when you were 6 years old, and you returned a dollar bill you found on the sidewalk to the stranger who dropped it, while your father called you a fool. You have a moral compass. That makes you dangerous to them." "Now, to the business," Walter said, his tone shifting to the steel-trap businessman I remembered. "The trust is structured with a specific clause. I call it the Leveraged Protection Protocol. It is designed to be a shield, but if struck, it becomes a spear." I leaned closer to the screen. "If you have accessed this account using the distress code, which you must have, or this video would not play, it automatically triggers a legal review. I have retained a man named Gideon Pike. He was a junior associate when I knew him, but he has the instincts of a wolf. The trust pays his retainer in perpetuity. If your parents, or anyone associated with the Caldwell estate, try to coerce you, threaten you, or legally challenge your right to this money, the bank is instructed to release the full hostility of the trust's legal arm. You do not have to fight them. Emery, the trust fights them for you. Check the other folders," he said, pointing a finger at the camera. "Folder 1 contains the proof of what they did to me. Folder 2 contains the proof of what they are doing to the market. I kept quiet because I was dying and I wanted peace. But you have a life to live. Do not let them bury you with their lies. Be brave, my girl. And remember, the truth is the only currency that doesn't devalue." The screen went black. The silence in Mara's apartment was absolute. I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I could hear the traffic outside on the street. But mostly, I could hear the ringing truth of his words. So you would never have to beg them for love. That was exactly what I had spent 33 years doing, begging for approval, begging for a seat at the table. And in the end, the price of admission was my integrity. Mara let out a long, low whistle. "Gideon Pike Emery. Do you know who Gideon Pike is?" I shook my head, wiping my eyes. "He is the managing partner of Pike, Sterling, and O'Connell in New York," Mara said, her voice awestruck. "He is not just a lawyer, he is a legal assassin. He handled the breakdown of the Atlantic merger last year. If your grandfather has him on a permanent retainer, my God, your parents are bringing a knife to a nuclear war." I turned back to the computer. "We need to see the documents," I said. I opened the folder labeled Safe Box 1. It contained scanned PDFs of legal documents dating back 17 years. I opened the first one. It was a loan application for the Caldwell Meridian Group, dated 3 months after Walter had suffered his first debilitating stroke, the one that had left him unable to speak or write for weeks before he died. I scrolled to the signature page. There, at the bottom, was Walter H. Caldwell's signature. It was steady, firm, but I remembered that month. I was home from boarding school. Grandpa couldn't even hold a spoon. They forged it, I whispered. I opened the next document. It was a personal guarantee for a line of credit worth $12 million, using Walter's personal estate as collateral. Again, signed during a period when he was in a coma. They used him. I said, anger replacing the sadness. They didn't just inherit his money. They used his identity to leverage loans they couldn't qualify for on their own. They started digging this hole 20 years ago. This is fraud, Mara said, reading over my shoulder. Straight up. Statute of limitations might be tricky on the fraud itself, but the fact that these loans are likely still being refinanced based on the original collateral that is ongoing deception. I opened Safe/Box 2. This folder was different. It was full of internal emails, invoices, and bank transfer records. Most of them were recent, forwarded to a secure server by an anonymous email address, likely a failsafe Grandpa had set up, or perhaps he had a mole inside the company long after he died. I clicked on a spreadsheet titled Meridian Flow Analysis. I recognized the project names: Project Azure, the Highland Development, Meridian Harbor. I looked at the columns. There were incoming funds from legitimate lenders, and then immediate outgoing transfers to a company called Lumina Holdings, based in the Cayman Islands. Lumina Holdings. I read aloud. I have seen that name. In the risk report last night, Dad listed it as a consulting partner for the harbor project. He claimed they were paid $4 million for architectural advisement. I opened the invoice folder. There were invoices from Lumina Holdings, but they weren't for architecture. They were vague. Retainer services, logistical support. Then I found the smoking gun, a scanned letter from a bank in the Caymans, addressed to Sterling Caldwell, confirming him as the sole beneficial owner of Lumina Holdings. I sat back, feeling sick. They are skimming, I said. They are borrowing money from banks to build buildings, paying themselves millions in fake consulting fees through this shell company, and then letting the projects fail or underperform. Mara grabbed the edge of the table. That is embezzlement. That is money laundering. Emery, they aren't just bad at business. They are stripping the company for parts. I thought about the dinner last night, the desperation in my father's eyes, the cash flow crisis. They aren't in a crisis because the market is bad. I realized they are in a crisis because they got greedy. They siphoned too much out, and now the foundation is crumbling. They needed the $45 million bridge loan not to save the company, but to cover the hole they dug before the auditors find it, and they needed me to sign it. If I had signed that risk assessment, I said, my voice cold, I would have been certifying that the money was going to the project. When the company inevitably collapsed, the investigators would have looked at my signature. I would have been the fall guy. Mara nodded slowly. That is why they kicked you out. Not because you said no, but because you asked questions. You are a compliance officer. If you had stayed, you would have found this eventually. They had to discredit you. They had to turn you into a disgruntled, unstable daughter, so that if you ever did find this, no one would believe you. I looked at the screen, at the face of my grandfather frozen in the thumbnail of the video. He had known. He had watched his own son turn into a monster, and he had been powerless to stop it from his deathbed, so he had built a weapon and buried it, waiting for me to dig it up. My phone, which was still connected to Mara's Wi-Fi, buzzed. It was an email notification, my personal email, from Diane Caldwell. Subject, let's be reasonable. I didn't open it. I didn't have to. I knew what it would say. The stick hadn't worked. I hadn't come crawling back begging for forgiveness this morning. So now, they would try the carrot. They would offer me a small allowance, maybe a condo, if I just kept my mouth shut and signed a non-disclosure agreement. Emery, Mara said. her voice serious. "You have $1.2 billion. You could disappear. You could move to Paris. You could buy an island and never think about these people again. You don't have to fight this." I looked at the silver card lying on the table. I thought about the humiliation in the lobby of Marston Ridge. I thought about the look on the security guard's face when he wouldn't let me in. I thought about my mother telling me I was a bad investment. If I run, I said, they win. They keep doing this. They keep hurting people. They keep using Grandpa's name to steal. I closed the laptop. The click was loud in the quiet apartment. I am not going to Paris. Mara. I picked up the flash drive and squeezed it in my fist. I am going to hire Gideon Pike. I am going to build a fortress of compliance so perfect that when I eventually testify against them, not a single word I say can be questioned. But you're broke, Mara reminded me, technically, until the funds clear. I smiled. It was a grim, sharp smile. I didn't feel broke. I have $1.2 billion and the truth. I said, I am going to follow the law. Mara, I am going to follow it so aggressively that it strangles them. I stood up and grabbed my coat. Where are you going? Mara asked. I need to buy a suit. I said, a real suit. And then, I am going to introduce myself to Mr. Pike. My parents wanted a war, they just declared it on the wrong generation. The office of Gideon Pike was located on the 44th floor of a steel spire in Manhattan, but I was meeting him in a satellite office in Charlotte that felt more like a bunker than a law firm. The walls were lined with books that looked red, not decorative, and the view of the city was obscured by heavy, soundproofing drapes. Gideon himself was a man who looked like he had been carved out of granite and dressed in Italian wool. He was 70 years old, with eyes that had seen every variation of human greed imaginable. He sat across from me, reading the letter of engagement I had signed an hour ago. Beside him sat a forensic accountant named Sarah, a woman who spoke very little but missed nothing. Your grandfather was a good man, Gideon said, placing the pen on the table. He was also a paranoid man. It seems his paranoia was justified. He is not paranoid if they are actually out to get you. I said. I was dressed in a new suit, navy blue, tailored, authoritative. I felt different. The fear that had paralyzed me on the porch 2 nights ago was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. We have reviewed the initial files from the flash drive. Gideon continued. It is extensive. We are bringing in an independent forensic team to trace every instance where your name, or Walter's name, was used to secure capital in the last 10 years. But I need to know your objective. Emery, do you want to destroy them, or do you want to survive them? I want to be clean, I said firmly. I want to sever every financial and legal tie to the Caldwell Meridian Group. I want my name removed from any document I did not sign. And if they go down, which they will, I want to be standing so far away that I don't even smell the smoke. Gideon nodded. A containment strategy. Smart. We will proceed with a silent defense. I have already contacted a crisis management firm on your behalf. They are not there to get you on magazine covers. They are there to monitor the wire. If your parents leak a story, we kill it before it prints. If they slander you, we sue for defamation before the tweet is even liked. He leaned forward. But you have to play your part. No lavish spending. No sudden lifestyle changes that scream, lottery winner. You are a compliance officer who was wrongfully terminated. Act like one. I took his advice to heart. I didn't buy a mansion. I moved out of Mara's apartment and rented a secure 2-bedroom unit in a building with a 24-hour doorman and keyed elevator access. It was nice, but it wasn't ostentatious. It was the kind of place a successful professional could afford. Not a billionaire heiress. The first thing I did with the initial transfer of funds was settle my debts. I paid off my car. I paid off the credit card my parents had frozen, sending the check directly to the bank's headquarters to bypass any local interference. Then, I handled Mara. I knew she would never accept a handout. Charity would break our friendship. So, I hired her. I sat her down in her cramped kitchen the night before I moved out. I am retaining you as my personal legal counsel for day-to-day affairs. I told her. Sliding a contract across the table. Gideon is handling the trust and the war with my parents, but I need someone I trust to handle my new business filings, my lease, and my personal liability. Mara looked at the contract. Her eyes widened at the retainer fee. It wasn't millions, but it was enough to pay off her student loans in 6 months. "Emery, this is too much," she said. "It is the market rate for a lawyer who has to deal with a client under federal scrutiny," I said, smiling. "Plus, you are the only one who knows the whole story. That makes you indispensable. Take the job." "Mara," she signed, and for the first time in years, I saw the weight lift off her shoulders. My next step was to reclaim my professional narrative. Marston Ridge Solutions had suspended me, hoping I would fade away. I didn't. I spent 3 days drafting a 50-page rebuttal to the internal investigation. I didn't use the trust's money to bribe anyone. I used my skills. I constructed a timeline of the dinner, the coerced loan signature, and the subsequent retaliation. I attached the time-stamped voicemail from my mother and the email from HR, proving the disciplinary meeting was scheduled before the alleged investigation even began. I submitted it to the ethics board and copied the CEO. 2 days later, I received a notification. The investigation was inconclusive, and my license was not revoked. They didn't hire me back. I didn't want to go back, but my record was clear. I was employable again, but I wasn't looking for a job. I was building one. I registered a new limited liability company, Cedarline Compliance Studio. I rented a small, shared office space in a co-working building downtown. I bought a standard laptop and a printer. I wanted to prove to myself, mostly that I was Emery Castillo, the expert. Not just Emery Castillo, the trust fund baby. My first client wasn't a pity hire. It was a mid-sized logistics firm that had heard about my exit from Marston Ridge and respected that I had refused to sign a bad loan. "We need someone who knows how to say no." The CEO told me during our meeting. I signed them for a standard consulting fee. When the first check for $4,000 cleared, I felt more pride than I did looking at the billion-dollar balance in the trust. That $4,000 was mine. I had earned it. But while I was building my fortress, Gideon was digging under my parents' castle. 2 weeks after I accessed the trust, I went to Gideon's office for a status update. The mood in the room was grim. The forensic team had finished mapping the Caldwell Meridian debt structure. Gideon projected a complex diagram onto the wall. It looked like a spider web spun by a spider on amphetamines. "It is worse than we thought," Gideon said. He pointed to a cluster of red lines. "Your parents are not just in debt, Emery. They are cross-collateralized to the point of absurdity. They have used the equity from the Meridian Harbor project, which doesn't exist yet, to secure the interest payments on the Parkside renovation. And they used the Parkside deed to secure the bridge loan they were trying to get you to sign off on." He tapped the screen. "It is a house of cards. If one lender calls in a loan, the entire structure collapses. They are technically insolvent. They have been solvent only on paper for 3 years. And here is the kicker." Sarah, the accountant, added. She slid a document toward me. "We found a loan from 5 years ago, a secondary mortgage on the family estate." I looked at the document. The guarantor listed was Walter H. Caldwell, but he was dead. I said, "He had been dead for 11 years when this was signed." "Exactly," Gideon said. "They didn't just forge his signature on business loans. They committed identity theft to refinance their own home. They have been paying the mortgage using funds siphoned from the business accounts, listing them as consulting fees to that shell company, Lumina Holdings." I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. They were living in a mansion they couldn't afford, paid for by stealing from a company that was failing, all while using a dead man's name as a shield. And they had the audacity to call me a failure. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now, we wait," Gideon said. "We have flagged the signature as fraudulent with the bank's fraud department. We didn't make a public scene. We just filed a standard dispute. The bank will launch an internal audit. When they realize the guarantor is a deceased man, they will freeze the credit line. And then the bridge loan falls through," Gideon said, "and the dominoes start to fall." I went back to my small office at Cedarline. I worked until 8 o'clock at night. reviewing compliance protocols for my logistics client. I was exhausted, but it was a good exhaustion. I felt clean. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. It was my mother. I hadn't spoken to her since the voicemail. I had blocked her number. But Gideon had advised me to unblock it and record everything. Let them dig their own grave, he had said. I pressed the record button on my external dictaphone, which I now carried everywhere, and answered, "Hello, Mother." I expected screaming. I expected threats. I expected her to demand why the bank was asking questions about Grandpa's signature. Instead, her voice came through the speaker soft, trembling, and sweet. It was the voice she used when she hosted charity galas, the voice of a martyr. "Emery, darling," she said. "Oh, thank God you answered. I have been so worried about you." I stared at the wall of my office. The manipulation was so transparent it was almost impressive. "I am fine. Diane," I said. I didn't call her Mom. "I know we said some harsh things," she continued, ignoring my coldness. "Your father, he is under so much pressure. We both are. But we are family. Families fight, but they forgive." She paused, waiting for me to fill the silence. "I didn't. We want you to come home for dinner tomorrow," she said. "Just a quiet dinner. No business, no papers. Just us. We miss our daughter. Please, Emery, let us make it right." The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. They didn't miss me. The audit notice from the bank must have hit Sterling's desk today. They knew the credit line was freezing. They knew the walls were closing in. They didn't want their daughter back. They wanted the witness back. They wanted to get me in that house, behind those heavy doors, and find out what I knew, or perhaps force me to sign something to undo the damage. It was a trap, a desperate, clumsy trap. I looked at the recording device spinning silently on my desk. "I can't come to dinner," I said calmly. "Emery, please." Her voice hardened just a fraction. "Don't be stubborn. We are willing to overlook your outburst. We are willing to welcome you back. We can even discuss getting your job back. Sterling knows the CEO." I almost laughed. They still thought they held the keys to my kingdom. They had no idea I had built my own. "I am busy," I said. "I have a company to run." "A company?" she asked, the sweetness cracking. "What company?" "My company," I said. "Good night, Mother." I hung up. My heart was pounding, not from fear, but from anticipation. They were pivoting. They were scared. Gideon was right. The house of cards was shaking. I saved the recording and emailed it to Gideon. Then I packed up my laptop and walked out into the cool night air. I was going home to my quiet, paid-for apartment. I was going to sleep soundly, because tomorrow, the real pressure would begin. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the one who was going to crack. The ceasefire lasted exactly 48 hours. I was sitting in my glass-walled office at Cedarline Compliance, reviewing a vendor vetting protocol for my logistics client. When my phone rang, it was not my mother this time. It was my father. I checked the recording app. It was running. I answered. "Ms. Castillo," I said, keeping my voice professional. "Emery, stop the charade." Sterling's voice came through. It sounded ragged. The smooth senator-like baritone was gone, replaced by the tight, clipped tone of a man watching the water rise above his neck. "We received a notification from the bank regarding the audit on the estate collateral." I said nothing. Gideon had told me that silence was often the loudest argument. "You are causing a scene. Emery," he continued, his voice dropping. "You are triggering alarms that do not need to be triggered. We can stop this audit. I can make a call to the board, but I need you to rescind the fraud alert. I cannot do that." "Sterling," I said. The alert was filed based on factual discrepancies regarding the guarantor. If the guarantor is dead, the signature is invalid. That is not a scene. That is the law. There was a pause. I heard him exhale, a long, shuddering breath. "Listen to me," he said. "We are liquidating the Aspen property. It will take 2 weeks to clear. We just need a bridge. We know Walter left you something, a safety net. We don't know how much is in there, but we know he had accounts at Summit Heritage." My stomach tightened. They knew the bank. They had hired a private investigator. I had been careful. But I hadn't been invisible. We need $5 million. Emery? Sterling said. The number hung in the air, heavy and desperate. Just for 10 days, as a loan. We will pay you interest, 10%. Just wire it to the operating account by noon, and we will forget this entire humiliating episode happened. We will welcome you back. We will even let you keep your little compliance hobby. I leaned back in my chair. They truly didn't get it. They thought I was holding out for a better interest rate. They thought this was a negotiation. I am not a bank. Sterling, I said coldly. And I am certainly not your bank. If you have a proposal, send it to my attorney, Gideon Pike. He handles all my financial correspondence. The line went dead silent for a second. Then, I heard a scuffling sound, like the phone was being grabbed. You ungrateful little wretch. It was my mother. The sweet, weeping woman from 2 nights ago had vanished. This was Diane the Vulture. We gave you life, she screamed. We gave you everything, and you sit there with your grandfather's money that should have been ours, and you watch us drown. You are sick, Emery. You are a sick, selfish girl. No wonder no man ever stays with you. You are cold. You are just like your grandfather. I am exactly like him. I said, and that is why you are not getting a cent. I hung up. I sat there, my hands trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of the kill. I saved the recording and sent it to Gideon, Exhibit B, but I had underestimated how dirty they were willing to fight. 3 hours later, my logistics client, Mr. Henderson, called me. He sounded awkward. Emery, look, you are doing great work, he started, but we have to pause the contract. Why, I asked, already knowing the answer. I got a call, he said, lowering his voice. From Sterling Caldwell. He insinuated that you are under investigation for embezzlement at your previous firm. He said you were fired for financial misconduct and that hiring you puts my company at risk of being blacklisted by the major lenders. I closed my eyes. This was tortious interference. It was illegal, but it was effective. Mr. Henderson, that is a lie. I said, I was cleared by the ethics board. I can send you the documentation. I believe you, he said. But I have a line of credit with a bank your father sits on the board of. I can't risk it. Emery, I am sorry. He hung up. I stared at the phone. They were cutting off my air supply. They couldn't touch the trust, so they were attacking my dignity. They wanted to prove that without them, I was unemployable. Then came the notification. Mara texted me a screenshot. Check the local business forums. Now, I opened the link. It was a post on Charlotte Insider, an anonymous gossip board frequented by the city's elite. The scandal of the century. Disgraced daughter of local real estate mogul allegedly defrauds elderly grandfather's dormant estate. Sources say Emery Castillo manipulated banking protocols to seize control of funds intended for charity. Legal action pending. It was vague enough to avoid immediate libel laws, but specific enough to destroy me. The comments were already piling up. Rich kids stealing from each other. I heard she was fired for cooking the books. I felt a wave of nausea. They were painting me as the thief. They were projecting their own crimes onto me. My phone buzzed again. It was Gideon. Come to my office, he said. Now, use the service entrance. I grabbed my purse and ran. When I stepped out of the co-working building, I felt eyes on me. I scanned the street. A black sedan was parked across the road. Engine idling. The windows were tinted too dark to be legal. I saw a flash of a camera lens from the passenger window. They were watching me. Intimidation. I didn't run. I pulled out my own phone, walked right up to the sedan, and took a high-resolution photo of the license plate. Then I took a video of the car, narrating the time and location. The sedan peeled away, tires screeching. I got into my car and drove to Gideon's office, taking a circuitous route to lose any tail. When I arrived, Gideon looked graver than usual. Sarah, the accountant, looked pale. Sit down. Emery, Gideon said. He slid a document across the polished granite table. It was a legal filing, a motion for emergency injunctive relief. Your father has filed a petition with the probate court, Gideon said. He is claiming that you are mentally incapacitated. I laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. Incapacitated because I wouldn't lend him money. He is using your exit from the family dinner, your erratic behavior of cutting off contact, and the fanciful claims of fraud as evidence of a psychotic break. Gideon explained. He is arguing that you are not competent to manage the assets of the Walter H. Caldwell Trust. He is asking the court to appoint him as your temporary conservator and to freeze the trust assets immediately to protect them. My blood ran cold. This was the nuclear option. If they could convince a judge I was crazy, they could take control of me, and the money. He can't do that. I said, I am a certified risk officer. I am sane. He has an affidavit, Gideon said, sliding another paper forward. I looked at it. It was signed by a psychiatrist I had seen twice when I was 22, after a bad breakup. Dr. Aris, patient exhibited signs of narcissistic delusion and persecution complex history. The affidavit read, he bought a doctor. I whispered, he bought a signature. Gideon corrected, but that is not the worst part. Gideon stood up and walked to the window. We dug deeper into the bridge loan application, the one you refused to sign. He said, the bank released the preliminary paperwork to us this morning because of the fraud alert. He turned to face me. Sterling submitted it anyway. I stared at him, but I didn't sign it. No, Gideon said. You didn't, but someone did. He put the document on the table. There, on the bottom line of the risk assessment certification, was my name, Emery Castillo, and next to it, a signature that looked terrifyingly like mine. It was a good forgery, but it wasn't perfect. The loop on the Y was too shallow. He forged my signature, I said, my voice shaking with rage. He committed a federal crime. He signed my name to a $45 million fraudulent loan. He is desperate, Emery, Gideon said. If that loan doesn't close by Friday, the shadow lenders from Chicago, the ones holding the debt on the shell company, are going to call in their marker. He needed that signature to release the funds. He took a gamble that you would come crawling back, or that he could bully you into silence before anyone checked. This is prison time. I said, yes, Gideon said, but only if we can prove it is a forgery before he freezes your assets. He pointed to the calendar. He has requested an emergency ex parte hearing. It is scheduled for Thursday morning, 48 hours from now. If the judge grants the temporary conservatorship, your accounts at Summit Heritage will be locked. You won't be able to pay me. You won't be able to pay Mara. You won't be able to access the evidence. And, Gideon added, his voice grim, Sterling will have legal authority to review the trust's contents. He will see the evidence Walter left, and he will destroy it. I felt the walls closing in. This was the trap. They didn't need to win the war. They just needed to win this one battle to disarm me. My phone buzzed. It was Mara. Emery. I am in trouble. I called her immediately. Mara. What is happening? I am being audited, she said, her voice sounding small. The State Bar Association just served me a notice. Someone filed a complaint claiming I am aiding and abetting a client in financial fraud. They are threatening to suspend my license pending investigation. My boss at the public defender's office just told me to go home. They were hitting everyone. They were burning my world to the ground. I gripped the phone. Mara, listen to me. Do not resign. Do not apologize. This is Sterling. He is terrified. I am scared. She whispered. I have student loans. I can't lose my license. You won't. I said, I promise you. I am going to fix this. I hung up and looked at Gideon. They came for my friend. I said, Gideon nodded. That is standard operating procedure for bullies. Isolate the victim. I stood up. I walked over to the document with the forged signature. I looked at it. It was the symbol of my father's arrogance. He thought I was just a prop in his life. He thought he could write my name and own my soul. I am not the victim. I said, I looked at Gideon. We are going to that hearing on Thursday, and we aren't just going to defend my sanity. We are going to counter-sue. We need to prove the forgery. Gideon said, we need the original document, not the scan. The ink analysis will prove the age of the signature and the pressure points. but the original is likely in your father's safe at the Meridian office. Or, I said, a memory flashing in my mind. It is with the bank officer who accepted it. Elliot Vaughn, Gideon said, catching on. No, I said, Elliot is at Summit Heritage. The bridge loan is with First Carolina Bank. My father's club friends, but, I continued, my mind racing. The loan officer at First Carolina. I know him. He was the junior analyst I trained 5 years ago. Trent, the one who texted me the warning. If Trent has the original file, Gideon said, and if we can get him to bring it to court, it is a long shot. I said, he risks his career. He risks prison if he hides evidence of a felony. Gideon said, I took a deep breath. I will get the file. I said, Gideon looked at me. Emery, if you approach him and your father finds out, he will claim witness tampering. Let him claim it. I said, I am done playing defense. I gathered my things. Emery, Gideon warned, be careful. A man who forges his daughter's signature is a man who has lost all moral boundaries. I walked to the door. He didn't lose them. Gideon, he never had them. I walked out into the hallway. The elevator dinged. I stepped inside and watched the doors close. My reflection in the metal was distorted, but I could see my eyes. They were hard. My mother wanted her daughter back. She was about to get her, but she wasn't going to like who showed up. I pulled out my phone and dialed Trent's number. It went to voicemail. Trent, it's Emery. I said, you know what they made you accept. You know it is fake. Thursday morning. I am going to court to burn them down. You can be standing next to me as a witness, or you can be standing next to them as a co-conspirator. You have 1 hour to decide. I hung up. I walked out of the building. The black sedan was gone. But I knew they were still watching. Let them watch. I thought, I wanted them to see this. The conference room in Gideon's office looked less like a law firm and more like a tactical command center. We had covered the glass walls with whiteboards, mapping out the anatomy of a financial corpse. It was Wednesday afternoon, less than 24 hours before the emergency hearing where my father would try to have me declared incompetent. I stood before the main whiteboard, a black marker in my hand. I wasn't just building a defense. I was constructing a timeline of decay. Here is the start, I said, drawing a thick line from 5 years ago. This is when the Meridian Harbor project broke ground. When they said it broke ground, Sarah, the forensic accountant, adjusted her glasses. The initial draw from the construction loan was $12 million. And here, I said, drawing a connecting line to a new box I had labeled Lumina Holdings, is where $8 million of that went. But it didn't just disappear into the Cayman Islands this time. We had found something new, something that made my stomach churn with a specific kind of nausea. I picked up a file folder labeled Hope Haven Initiative. This is the nail in the coffin, I said quietly. My parents didn't just steal from banks, they stole from the poor. The Hope Haven Initiative was a tax-exempt charitable project my mother had championed 3 years ago. It was supposed to be affordable housing for veterans. I remembered the gala. I remembered my mother weeping on stage about giving back to our heroes. I opened the file. The permits were for 40 units. The funding they raised from state grants and private donations totaled $6 million. But the invoices, Sarah said, her voice tight with disgust, show that the lumber and steel were purchased from a subsidiary of Lumina Holdings at 400% of the market rate. They bought the materials from themselves at a markup, drained the charity's funds, and then claimed supply chain issues when the project stalled. I looked at the photos of the site. It was just a mud pit with a few rusting beams. They used veterans as a shield to launder $6 million. I said, Gideon sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable, like a judge who had seen too many sins to be surprised. This is not just embezzlement. Emery, Gideon said, this is wire fraud, tax fraud, and grand larceny. If we present this tomorrow, we aren't just stopping a conservatorship, we are sending your parents to federal prison for 20 years. He looked at me. Are you ready for that? I looked at the mud pit in the photo. I thought about the $1.2 billion sitting in my trust. Money my grandfather had made honestly, I am not sending them to prison. Gideon, I said, they sent themselves the moment they signed those checks. I am just turning on the lights. Gideon nodded. He reached for his laptop. I am sending the formal notice to Summit Heritage Trust, he said. We are activating the leveraged protection protocol under the coercion clause. What does that mean? Practically, I asked. It means the bank goes into a defensive lockdown, Gideon explained. Elliot Vaughn receives a legal mandate to log every single interaction regarding the trust, every phone call, every ping, every attempt to query the balance. If your father tries to use his influence to get information before the hearing, it will be recorded as a hostile act against a protected beneficiary. I felt a grim satisfaction. My father was used to backroom deals and handshakes. He was about to walk into a digital fortress. My phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a call from an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered, "Hello, Miss Castillo." The voice was shaky, old, and familiar. I racked my brain. "Arthur?" I asked. Arthur Penhaligon. He had been the head of accounts payable at Caldwell Meridian for 30 years. He was a man who brought homemade donuts on Fridays. My father had fired him 2 years ago, claiming restructuring, but I always suspected Arthur knew too much. I heard about what is happening. Arthur whispered. It sounded like he was outside. I could hear traffic. I saw the post on the internet about them calling you a fraud. It is a lie. Arthur, I said gently. I know, he said. I know it is a lie because I saw the emails. Emery, before they escorted me out of the building, I backed up my station. I have the delete folder. My heart hammered against my ribs. Arthur, what is in that folder? The instructions, he said. The instructions from your father to forge the signatures. Not just yours, your grandfather's too. And the emails to the bank managers promising them kickbacks if they looked the other way on the valuations. I looked at Gideon. He was watching me intently. Arthur, I said, my voice steady. Where are you? I met him 40 minutes later in a small park on the outskirts of the city. He looked older, his coat threadbare. He handed me a small, battered USB drive. I didn't do it for the money, he said, his eyes watery. I did it because your grandfather paid for my wife's cancer treatment when the insurance denied it. He was a good man. You are the only one left who is like him. I took the drive. Thank you. Arthur, you have no idea what this means. I drove back to the office with the drive burning a hole in my pocket. This was it. This was the smoking gun. It proved intent. It proved malice. When I plugged it into the forensic computer, Sarah gasped. Look at this, she said, pointing to an email from Sterling to his personal assistant, dated 3 days ago. Subject, the E-problem. Body, she won't sign. Get the scan of her signature from the HR file. Overlay it on the First Carolina document. Make sure the pressure looks real. We need that money by Friday or we are dead. He put it in writing, Gideon said, leaning back. The arrogance. He actually put the order to commit a felony in an email. This is checkmate. I said. Gideon looked at me. We can leak this. Emery. We can drop this to the press tonight. It would destroy their credibility before court even opens tomorrow. The scandal of the century would become the arrest of the century. I looked at the screen. I thought about the anonymous post calling me a thief. I thought about the humiliation. It would be so easy to destroy them publicly, to let the court of public opinion tear them apart. No, I said. Gideon raised an eyebrow. No, we are not them, I said firmly. We do not fight with gossip. We do not fight with leaks. We take this to the district attorney, and we take it to the judge. I want to win on the record. I want the history books to show that I did this the right way. Gideon smiled. A rare, genuine expression. Your grandfather would be proud. But my mother wasn't done playing dirty. While we were preparing the exhibits for the hearing, Mara walked in. She looked furious. Don't look at your phone, she said. Why, I asked, immediately reaching for it. Emery, don't I opened social media? I couldn't help it. It was everywhere. A video posted to Diane Caldwell's personal page, shared thousands of times in the last hour. I clicked play. My mother was sitting in her sunroom, wearing no makeup, her hair slightly messy, a calculated look of distress. She was holding a handkerchief. I didn't want to do this. She sobbed to the camera. But I am a mother who has lost her child. Emery, if you are seeing this, please come home. We don't care about the money you took. We don't care about the mental illness. We just want you safe. You have cut us off. You have left your aging parents alone to deal with this crisis. How can you be so cruel? The caption read, for Emery, heartbroken, Mom. Mental health awareness. I watched it twice. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She had taken the narrative of her own abuse and flipped it, painting herself as the victim of a mentally unstable, greedy daughter. The comments were brutal. What a monster. Imagine doing that to your own mom. Rich kids have no soul. I felt tears prick my eyes, not of sadness, but of frustration. The injustice of it was suffocating. She was using a mother's love, something she had never actually given me, as a weapon to assassinate my character. Don't engage, Gideon said softly. This is bait. She wants you to post an angry rant. She wants you to look unstable. I put the phone down. I am not going to post. I said, I am going to save this video. Why? Mara asked. Because, I said, my voice hardening. She just admitted on video that she believes I have mental illness. When we prove tomorrow that I am sane and that she knew about the fraud, this video becomes proof that she perjured herself to the public to cover a crime. She just handed us a defamation case worth millions. I stood up and walked to the window. The city lights were flickering on. Let her cry, I whispered. She is going to need the practice for when the handcuffs go on. The office phone on Gideon's desk rang. It was a sharp, jarring sound in the quiet room. It was 7 o'clock in the evening. Gideon answered. Pike. He listened for a moment, his eyes narrowing. Then he looked at me. Put him on speaker, Gideon said. He pressed the button. Mr. Pike. This is Elliot Vaughn at Summit Heritage Trust. Elliot's voice was tight, urgent. Mr. Vaughn, Gideon said. We are in the middle of hearing prep. I am aware, Elliot said, but I am calling to report a level 0 security event. It just happened 2 minutes ago. What kind of event? I asked, stepping closer to the desk. Someone just submitted a physical access request to the central vault system, Elliot said. They are not at the branch. They are using a remote executor key. A remote executor key? I asked. What is that? It is a master override, Elliot explained. Walter Caldwell had 2 made. One was destroyed. The other was supposed to be in his possession when he died. My father, I realized. He found it. He must have found it in Grandpa's old papers at the house. The person using the key is attempting to authorize a transfer of assets. Elliot continued. They are trying to move the deed of the Meridian Harbor property out of the trust and into a holding company. Wait, I said, confused. Why is the Meridian Harbor deed in my trust? I thought my father owned that land. That was the collateral for his bridge loan. There was a silence on the line. Then Elliot spoke, and his words changed everything. No, Ms. Castillo, your father doesn't own the land. He never did. Walter bought that land 20 years ago and placed it in the trust. Your father has been building his development on land he doesn't own, using a forged deed to get the permits. I gasped. The scale of the lie was getting bigger by the second. The system has flagged the transfer because of the protection protocol you activated, Elliot said. But the executor key is powerful. It initiates a 24-hour countdown. If we don't physically override it at the terminal by tomorrow morning, the land transfers automatically. My father was trying to steal the land from under me before the hearing. Stop it, Gideon barked. Freeze the system. I can't, Elliot said. The only way to stop an executor key countdown is for the primary beneficiary, Ms. Castillo, to be physically present at the bank to assert dominance over the account. When I asked, now, Elliot said, or at least before the market opens. If that land transfers, your father will have the collateral he needs to close his bridge loan, and he will have the cash to fight you for the next 10 years. I looked at Gideon. I have to go to the bank. I said, it's a trap. Mara said immediately. Emery, think about it. It's night. The bank is in the financial district. which is empty. If Sterling knows you have to go there, he might be waiting. I finished her sentence. Gideon stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. Then he won't be waiting for just you, Gideon said. He picked up his briefcase. Mara, call the private security detail we have on standby. Gideon ordered. Emery is going to the bank, but she is entering that building with a phalanx of guards. I grabbed the USB drive. Let's go, I said. We left the office, moving fast. The night air was cold. As I got into the armored car Gideon had summoned, I checked my phone one last time. My mother's video was still playing on a loop. We just want you safe. I looked out the window at the dark streets of Charlotte. I am coming for the truth. Mother, I thought, and safety is no longer the priority. Victory is. The armored car ride to Summit Heritage Trust felt less like a commute and more like a deployment into a war zone. The city of Charlotte streaked by in a blur of neon and rain, but inside the heavy vehicle, the silence was absolute. Gideon sat across from me, his face illuminated by the blue light of his tablet, reviewing the extraction protocols. Beside him, one of the private security guards checked his earpiece. We pulled up to the curb of the financial district. The street was largely deserted at 8 o'clock at night, save for a few cleaning crews in the adjacent towers. But Summit Heritage Trust was awake. The lights in the lobby were dimmed to a low, amber glow, but I could see movement inside. Stay close to me, Gideon said as the heavy door unlatched. We go straight to Vaughn's office. We do not stop. We moved as a unit toward the entrance. The security guard at the door recognized me this time, or perhaps he recognized the grim determination on my face and opened the iron-grated doors immediately. Elliot Vaughn was waiting for us in the center of the lobby. He looked rattled. His usually immaculate suit was rumpled, his tie loosened at the collar. He was holding a tablet with both hands, his knuckles white. Ms. Castillo, he said, his voice echoing in the cavernous marble space. Thank God you are here. What is the status? Gideon asked, stepping forward. Elliot turned the tablet toward us. The system is in a deadlock, he explained, walking us briskly toward the main counter. At 7:45, we received a digital transmission from a secure server. It was an executor override command. It utilized a cryptographic key that matches the one issued to Walter Caldwell 30 years ago. My father found the key, I said, feeling a surge of anger. He went through Grandpa's things. He didn't just find the key, Elliot said, stopping at the counter. He is using it to attach a file to the trust record. Look, I looked at the screen. A document was queued in the system, flashing red. It was a petition for an emergency asset freeze and temporary conservatorship. It was the document Gideon had warned me about, the one they were supposed to present in court tomorrow morning. But here it was, digitally signed and uploaded directly into the bank's mainframe using my grandfather's stolen authority key. He is trying to trick the algorithm, Gideon said, his voice low and dangerous. He is using Walter's authority key to validate his own petition against Walter's beneficiary. He is trying to get the system to freeze itself before the judge even bangs the gavel. Is it working? I asked. It initiated a 24-hour hold. Elliot said, That is why I needed you here. The system requires the physical presence of the primary beneficiary to override a conflicting command from an executor key. I need you to place your hand on the scanner and verbally confirm that you are competent and that you reject the transfer of the Meridian Harbor deed. I can do that. I said, let's do it now. Elliot nodded and moved behind the counter to activate the biometric panel. I reached out my hand. Suddenly, the heavy double doors at the entrance of the bank slammed open. The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet lobby. I spun around. 2 security guards were stumbling back, pushed aside by a wall of people. It wasn't just my parents. It was a spectacle. Sterling Caldwell strode in first. Wearing a tuxedo, he must have come straight from a benefit dinner. He looked like a titan of industry, his face flushed with righteous indignation. Behind him was my mother, Diane, in a shimmering evening gown, clutching a handkerchief. But they weren't alone. Trailing them were 3 other couples people I recognized immediately. The CEO of First Carolina Bank, a prominent city councilman, and a wealthy donor to my mother's charity. They were clearly the dinner guests my parents had dragged along, witnesses to the drama. "There she is," my mother screamed. Her voice was shrill, shattering the dignified silence of the bank. She ran toward me, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. "Emery, oh, thank God we found you." I took a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. Gideon stepped in front of me, a human shield in a pinstripe suit. "Mr. Caldwell." "Mrs. Caldwell," Gideon said, his voice booming. "You are trespassing on private property. This is a secure banking facility." My father didn't stop. He walked right up to the velvet rope, ignoring Gideon completely. He pulled out his phone and held it up. The camera lens pointed directly at my face. The red recording light was blinking. Trespassing Sterling laughed, a harsh, barking sound. "We are here to save our daughter. We tracked her phone. We knew she would come here in her manic state to try and liquidate the funds." He turned the phone to the bewildered VIPs behind him. "Look at her," he shouted, gesturing at me. "Look at her eyes. She is unstable. She has been brainwashed by this lawyer into thinking she can steal her grandfather's legacy." Diane threw herself against the counter, sobbing theatrically. "Emery, please stop this. You are not yourself. You are having an episode. Just come home with us. We can get you help. We can fix this. Don't let these men steal our family's money through you." I stood there, paralyzed for a split second by the sheer audacity of it. They had brought an audience. They were staging an intervention in the lobby of Summit Heritage Trust to create evidence for the court hearing. If I screamed, I looked crazy. If I ran, I looked guilty. There were other clients in the bank, a few men in dark suits sitting in the far lounge area. Clearly international businessmen. They had all stood up, watching the scene with rapt attention. I felt the heat rising in my face. This was their weapon, shame. They thought that if they made it public enough, loud enough, and ugly enough, I would fold just to make it stop. Elliot Vaughn slammed his hand on the counter. "Order," he shouted. "This is a place of business." Sterling turned the camera on Elliot. "And you," Sterling sneered. "You are the bank manager enabling this fraud. You are letting a mentally ill woman access millions of dollars because you want the commission. I will have your license. Sir, I will have this entire bank investigated by morning." Gideon moved closer to my father. "Mr. Caldwell, I strongly suggest we move this conversation to a private conference room," Gideon said, his voice deadly calm. "You are making a scene that you will regret." "No," Sterling roared. He backed away, keeping the camera trained on us. "No more backroom deals. I want witnesses. I want everyone to see what you are doing to my family. You are preying on a sick girl." My mother reached out, trying to grab my hand over the counter. "Emery, baby, listen to me," she pleaded, her eyes wide and wet. "The trust, it is too much for you. It is dangerous. Daddy is just trying to protect the assets so they are there for you when you get better. Just sign the paper. Just come home." I looked at her. I looked at the tears that didn't quite reach her eyes. I looked at the councilman behind her, who was looking at me with pity. They were winning, in the court of public opinion. Right here in this lobby, they were winning. They were the desperate, loving parents, and I was the cold, distant, unstable daughter being manipulated by a greedy lawyer. I felt a sudden clarity wash over me. It was cold and sharp, like the blade of a knife. I stepped out from behind Gideon. I walked up to the velvet rope, closing the distance between me and my father's camera. Sterling grinned triumphantly. He thought I was surrendering. I looked directly into the lens. "You want witnesses?" "Sterling," I asked. My voice was not loud, but it carried through the silence of the room. "You want everyone to know the truth about the trust, Emery." "Don't speak," Gideon warned, but I raised a hand to stop him. My father lowered the phone slightly, confused by my tone. "We just want to protect you," he lied smoothly. I turned to Elliot. "Elliot," I said, "is the red envelope protocol active?" Elliot froze. His eyes darted from me to my parents. "Ms. Castillo," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The red envelope is a nuclear option. It contains sensitive family disclosures. I know what it contains." I said, I turned back to my parents. You say I'm unstable, I said, addressing the room. You say I'm stealing. You say you are here to protect the family legacy. I pointed to the secure drawer behind the counter. Inside that vault is a sealed red envelope left by Walter Caldwell. He left specific instructions that it was only to be opened if his family tried to coerce the beneficiary. My mother stopped crying. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't know about the envelope. I could see the calculation happening in her brain. I don't know what you're talking about, Diane said. This is another delusion. Then open it. I challenged. The lobby went dead silent. The councilman shifted uncomfortably. If I am crazy, I said, stepping closer to the rope, then the envelope is just a piece of paper. It will prove nothing. And I will go home with you. I will sign whatever you want. I saw my father's grip on his phone tighten, but I continued, my voice hardening. If I am sane, and if Walter knew exactly who you were, then inside that envelope is the truth. I looked at Elliot. Mr. Vaughn, please place the red envelope on the counter. Elliot hesitated. He looked at the security guards. He looked at the VIP clients watching. He looked at Gideon, who gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Elliot unlocked the drawer. He reached in and pulled out the thick, wax-sealed envelope. He placed it on the mahogany surface with a heavy thud. It sat there between us, a physical manifestation of judgment. My father stared at it. He recognized the seal. I saw the recognition flicker in his eyes. He remembered his father's wax stamp. "This is theater," Sterling shouted, but his voice cracked. He took a step back. "We are not playing your games. Emery, you asked for witnesses." I said, "Open it." I looked at the councilman and the bank CEO standing behind my parents. "You are witnesses, aren't you?" I asked them. "My father claims I am incompetent. He claims this bank is fraudulent. Surely, if he is right, he has nothing to fear from a letter written by the man who built this fortune, the bank CEO. A man named Mr. Henderson. Not my client, but a powerful figure in Charlotte spoke up. "Sterling," he said, his voice gruff. "Open the letter. If the girl is sick, let's end this." Sterling turned red. He was trapped. He had created the audience, and now the audience was demanding a performance he hadn't rehearsed. My mother looked at the envelope with genuine fear. She pulled at Sterling's sleeve. "Let's go," she hissed. "Sterling, let's just go." "No," I said. "You don't get to leave. You broke into my bank. You accused me of fraud. You live-streamed my humiliation. We are finishing this." I looked at Elliot. "Mr. Vaughn," I said, as the beneficiary. I authorized the opening of the red envelope in the presence of legal counsel and witnesses. Elliot looked at the envelope. He looked at my parents. "If I break this seal," Elliot said, his voice grave, "the contents become a matter of institutional record. They will be entered into the discovery for the hearing tomorrow." And he paused, looking directly at my father, "and once read, they cannot be unread. There are reputations in this room that will not survive what is written on these pages." Sterling lowered his phone. The recording light went off. The bluster was leaking out of him, replaced by the primal fear of a predator who realizes he has walked into a cage. "Open it," I said. Elliot reached for the letter opener. The silver blade caught the light. He slid the blade under the wax seal. Snap! The sound of the wax breaking was louder than the shout had been. Elliot unfolded the heavy parchment inside. There was a second document attached to it, a blue legal sheet. He scanned the first few lines. His face went pale. He looked up, and for the first time, he didn't look like a polite banker. He looked like a judge delivering a death sentence. He cleared his throat. "This is a supplemental addendum to the Walter H. Caldwell Trust, dated 3 days before his death." Elliot read. My mother let out a strangled sound. Elliot continued reading. "I, Walter Caldwell, being of sound mind, hereby acknowledge that my son, Sterling, and his wife, Diane, have engaged in a systematic effort to deceive me regarding the solvency of the company. I have discovered the forgery of my signature on the First Carolina loan documents dated August 4th, 2004. The lobby erupted in whispers. The bank CEO behind Sterling gasped. "That is a lie." Sterling screamed, lunging for the counter. "That is a forgery, security." Elliot barked. The guard stepped forward, blocking my father. Sterling was panting, his face purple. Elliot held up the blue paper. "And this," Elliot said, his voice cutting through the noise, "is a confession." "A confession?" Gideon asked, stepping forward. "It is a notarized affidavit," Elliot said, looking at my mother. "Signed by Diane Caldwell. In exchange for Walter paying off a gambling debt she incurred in Monte Carlo 15 years ago." My mother froze. She looked like she had been turned to stone. "It details," Elliot read, "the exact mechanism by which Sterling Caldwell inflated the assets of the Meridian Group to secure loans, and her complicity in hiding the mail from Walter." The room spun. My mother hadn't just been a bystander. She had sold my father out to Grandpa years ago to save her own skin, and Grandpa had kept the receipt. The councilman stepped away from my parents as if they were contagious. The bank CEO looked at Sterling with pure disgust. "You brought us here for this," the CEO hissed. "You brought us here to watch you get exposed as a fraud." Sterling looked around wildly. The camera was off, but the eyes of the city's elite were on him. He looked at me, Emery. He pleaded, his voice a broken whisper. "Stop him, please. We are family." I looked at the man who had thrown my suitcase on the porch. I looked at the woman who had made a video calling me crazy. I looked at the red envelope on the counter. I didn't stop him. I said, "You did." Elliot looked at the final paragraph. "There is a final instruction." Elliot said, "Read it." I said, "In the event that this envelope is opened due to coercion by Sterling or Diane Caldwell, the bank is instructed to immediately transmit digital copies of these proofs to the Federal Bureau of Investigation's Financial Crimes Division." Elliot looked up. He reached for the keyboard. "I am legally obligated to press send." "Mr. Caldwell." Sterling fell to his knees. It wasn't a figure of speech. He physically collapsed onto the marble floor of the bank lobby, the tuxedo bunching around him, a king whose castle had just evaporated into mist. My mother stood there, staring at nothing, her socialite mask shattering into 1,000 pieces. I turned to Gideon. "Is the hearing tomorrow still necessary?" I asked. Gideon looked at the sobbing man on the floor and the stunned witnesses. "No," Gideon said, closing his briefcase. "I don't think they will be making it to court." But as Elliot's finger hovered over the enter key, the lobby doors opened again. This time, it wasn't a family member. 4 men in windbreakers walked in. On the back of their jackets, in bold yellow letters, was the acronym I had been expecting since I found the muddy construction site. FBI. They didn't look at me. They looked straight at the man kneeling on the floor. "Sterling Caldwell," the lead agent asked. My father looked up, tears streaming down his face. "We need to talk about the Hope Haven initiative," the agent said. "I watched them pull him up. I watched them put the handcuffs on. I watched my mother try to walk away, only to be gently stopped by a female agent. I stood in the center of the storm, the silver card in my pocket feeling warm against my hip. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free." As they led my parents out past the stunned VIPs, my father looked back at me one last time. His eyes were filled with hatred. Yes, but also with a dawning realization. He had kicked me out of the house to save his fortune, and in doing so, he had handed me the key to his destruction. I turned back to the counter. "Mr. Vaughn," I said, "please execute the override on the deed transfer." Elliot nodded. Typing rapidly, "Command executed, asset secured." I looked at the screen. The countdown stopped. The land was safe. I turned to Gideon and Mara. "Let's go home," I said. We walked out of the bank, leaving the wreckage of the Caldwell dynasty behind us on the marble floor. The rain had stopped. The air was clean, and for the first time in 33 years, the silence wasn't empty. It was full of possibility. The silence that followed the entry of the federal agents was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. The air in the lobby of Summit Heritage Trust felt less like oxygen and more like concrete. My father, Sterling Caldwell, was still on his knees, his tuxedo trousers soaking up the cold from the marble floor, while the lead FBI agent stood over him like a monolith. But the handcuffs had not yet clicked shut. There was a pause, a suspended moment of horror where the reality of the situation was still sinking into the marrow of my parents' bones. Elliot Vaughn held the contents of the red envelope in his gloved hands. The document was old, the paper slightly yellowed, but the ink was as black as a judge's robe. "Before these officers execute their warrant," Elliot said, his voice cutting through the tension, "I am required by the bylaws of this institution to read the final addendum of the Walter H. Caldwell Trust into the official record. This is the trigger mechanism that summoned the authorities." My mother, Diane, was trembling so violently that the sequins on her gown made a soft, rattling sound. She looked at the paper as if it were a death warrant. In a way, it was. Elliot adjusted his glasses and began to read. "To my granddaughter, Emery. If you are hearing this, it means that my son, Sterling, has finally proven me right. I spent the last years of my life watching him look at my assets, not with gratitude, but with a hunger that scared me. I saw him practicing my signature. I saw the way Diane looked at the offshore account brochures when she thought I was asleep. The words hung in the air. A spectral indictment from 16 years ago. My father looked up, his face ashen. He had thought his father was a senile old man. He had been wrong. I knew that eventually. They would run out of their own money. Elliot continued reading, and I knew that when they did, they would come for yours. They would try to bully you. They would try to steal the title to the land. They would try to erase you to save themselves. Therefore, I have attached the poison pill clause to the Meridian Harbor deed." The lead FBI agent stepped back slightly, allowing Elliot to finish. Even the law respected the voice of Walter Caldwell. "The poison pill clause," Elliot read, his voice steady and merciless, "states that the deed to the Meridian Harbor waterfront property, the land upon which Sterling Caldwell has built his entire leveraged empire, was never transferred to the Caldwell Meridian Group. I retained the air rights and the ground lease within this trust." My father let out a strangled gasp. "No," he whispered, "that is impossible. I have the deed. I have the transfer document signed by you in 2008. Elliot lowered the paper and looked at my father with pity. "No, Mr. Caldwell," Elliot said, "you have a forgery. And unluckily for you, Walter anticipated that you would forge it." Elliot picked up the second sheet of paper from the envelope. "This is the true title," Elliot said. "It shows that the Walter H. Caldwell Trust retains 100% ownership of the land. The clause specifies that if any attempt is made to use this land as collateral for a loan without the beneficiary's explicit, in-person consent, the trust automatically reclaims the land and voids any unauthorized structures built upon it." The room gasped. The bank's CEO, Mr. Henderson, looked like he was going to be sick. "Do you understand what this means?" Sterling Gideon Pike asked, his voice low. My father shook his head, his eyes wide and unseeing. "It means you mortgaged land you did not own," Gideon explained, dissecting the catastrophe with surgical precision. "You took $45 million from lenders using collateral that belonged to your daughter. That is not just a bad business deal. That is bank fraud. That is securities fraud. That is grand larceny." "And," Gideon added, pointing to the muddy construction site photos on the evidence table we had set up, "since you accepted state grant money for the Hope Haven charity based on that same land ownership, you have defrauded the government of North Carolina." The weight of it crushed Sterling. He had built a castle on sand, and now the tide had come in. The FBI agent stepped forward again. He didn't need to hear anymore. The envelope had provided the motive, the method, and the proof. "Sterling Caldwell," the agent said, pulling a pair of metal cuffs from his belt. "You are under arrest for wire fraud, money laundering, and identity theft." The sound of the ratcheting metal was loud. Click, click. My father didn't fight. He looked deflated. A balloon with the air let out. He looked at the councilman, his friend, pleading for help. The councilman turned his back, pretending to examine a painting on the wall. Then the agent turned to my mother. "Diane Caldwell." He said, "No." My mother shrieked. She backed away, knocking into the velvet rope. "I didn't do anything. I am just a wife. I didn't sign the papers." Elliot Vaughn held up the blue affidavit from the envelope, the confession she had signed 15 years ago to cover her gambling debts. "You admitted to conspiracy to defraud the estate in 2005, Mrs. Caldwell," Elliot said coldly. "And the video you posted tonight claiming your daughter was mentally incompetent when you knew she was the rightful owner adds obstruction of justice and criminal defamation to your list." The female agent moved in. My mother fought. She flailed, her expensive heels slipping on the marble. "Emery," she screamed, her voice raw and terrified. "Emery, tell them to stop. I am your mother." She lunged toward me, her hands reaching out, her manicured nails clawing at the air. The agent caught her wrists and spun her around. The cuffs went on. "Emery," she wailed, the sound echoing off the high ceiling. "We did this for you. We wanted to keep the family name great for you. Don't let them take us." I stood there, watching them. For 33 years, their approval had been the only currency that mattered to me. I had starved myself for it. I had worked myself into the ground for it. I had let them treat me like an employee in my own life just to hear them say, "Good job, Emery." And now, here they were, stripped of their pretense, stripped of their power. Just two desperate criminals begging the victim to save them one last time. The lobby was dead silent. The VIPs were watching. The staff was watching. Gideon and Mara were watching. I walked forward. The agents paused, allowing me a final moment. My mother looked up at me, mascara running down her face, her eyes wild with hope. She thought I was going to intervene. She thought the old Emery, the doormat, the fixer, the good daughter was back. "Emery," she sobbed, "please, fix this. Call the lawyers. Pay them. You have the money now. You can pay them off. We can be a family again." I looked at her. I looked at my father, who was staring at the floor, unable to meet my gaze. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the silver card. The card they had mocked. The card they had ignored. "I am not going to fix this. Mother," I said. My voice was calm. It didn't shake. It didn't waver. "But we are family," she cried. "No," I said. "We are a corporation. That is what you taught me. Isn't it? People are assets or liabilities." I looked at the FBI agent. "They are liabilities." I said. My father made a sound that was half sob, half groan. "Emery," he rasped. Why are you doing this? Is this revenge? Is this because I kicked you out?" I looked at him, and I felt a strange sense of pity. Not enough to save him, but enough to answer him. "I am not taking revenge. Dad," I said softly. I gestured to the pile of evidence, to the forged signatures, to the stolen land, to the years of lies. "I am just stopping saving you." I turned my back on them. "Take them away," the agent said. There was a commotion of movement. My mother screamed my name one last time, a long, drawn-out sound that faded as the heavy glass doors closed behind them. I saw the flashing lights of the patrol cars through the window. I saw the press vans pulling up, their cameras flashing in the rain. Then, they were gone. The lobby was quiet again. Elliot Vaughn exhaled, a long breath that seemed to deflate his entire frame. He looked at the red envelope on the counter, then at me. "Ms. Castillo," he said gently, "we need one final signature to activate the permanent protection of the trust and to formally transfer the title of the land back to your control." I walked to the counter. I picked up the heavy fountain pen. I signed my name, Emery Castillo. It wasn't the shaky signature of the girl who had been kicked off her porch 3 nights ago. It was the signature of a woman who owned her name. Gideon walked up beside me. He placed a hand on my shoulder. "It is done," he said. "The forensic files have already been transferred to the district attorney. The civil suits will follow. But with the criminal charges, the assets will be frozen. You are clear. Emery, your name is clean. I looked at the document. What happens to the company, I asked. The employees. The people like Arthur. We can petition the court to appoint a receiver, Gideon said. With your capital, you could theoretically buy the debt. You could restructure it. You could fire the board and rehire the people who actually did the work. I thought about Arthur. I thought about the junior analysts who had been terrified of my father. Do it, I said. Burn the Caldwell Meridian Group to the ground, and then build something honest from the ashes. Call it the Walter Group. Gideon smiled. I will draw up the papers in the morning. Mara came over and hugged me. She was crying. Just a little. You did it. She whispered. You actually did it. I hugged her back, holding on tight. I didn't do it alone. I said, I looked around the bank one last time. The marble didn't look cold anymore. It looked solid. The dark wood didn't look imposing. It looked protective. This wasn't a tomb for my grandfather's money. It was a fortress he had built for me. I turned to Elliot. Mr. Vaughn. I said, thank you. He bowed his head. It was an honor. Ms. Castillo, your grandfather. He would have enjoyed the show. I laughed, a real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from my chest. Yes, I said, I think he would have. I walked toward the doors. The security guard held them open for me. I stepped out into the night. The rain had stopped, and the air smelled of wet pavement and ozone. The city of Charlotte stretched out before me, a grid of lights and shadows. 3 days ago, I had stood on a porch with a suitcase and no future. I had been erased. I had been zeroed out. Now, I stood on the steps of my own bank, with $1.2 billion in the vault, and the truth in my pocket. My parents were gone. The lies were gone. The fear was gone. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cool night air. I checked my phone. There was a text from the logistics client. Mr. Henderson, I saw the news. I am so sorry. Can we meet tomorrow? I deleted the text. I didn't need his contract. I didn't need anyone's permission to exist anymore. I walked down the steps toward the waiting car. I was Emery Castillo. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't just surviving, I was free. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, justice, and the ultimate comeback. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. Are you listening from a busy city like Emery, or somewhere quiet? Please drop a comment below with your location, and let me know what you would have done if you found that silver card. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please make sure to subscribe to Maya Revenge Stories. Hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this story reach even more people who need a reminder that the truth always wins. See you in the next story.